Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
Hi everyone, I'm Crystal Contreras and I'm the Director of Inform at the Commonwealth Club. Welcome to tonight's program, Choose Possibility with Sukhinder Singh Cassidy. This program will be moderated by Suzanne St. John Crane, CEO of American Leadership Forum, Silicon Valley. If you'd like to ask either of our speakers a question during this program, you can do that in the chat or comment section of the live stream that you're currently watching. The Commonwealth Club has gone full speed ahead with the full slate of live and online programming this summer and fall. We ask that you consider donating to the club to help us continue our work this year and beyond. Please visit us at commonwealthclub.org/online to learn more, and you can also click the donate button you see to the right side of your screen live during this program. Now, please join me in welcoming Sukhinder Singh Cassidy and Suzanne St. John Crane to Inforum.
Good evening. Good evening, everybody. I'm Suzanne St. John Crane, CEO of American Leadership Forum Silicon Valley and president of ALF National. Welcome to tonight's virtual program with Inforum at the Commonwealth Club. This evening, I am excited to be in conversation with Sukhinder Singh Cassidy, founder and chairperson of the Board List. In 2015, Sukhinder made headlines when she published an open letter, Tech Women Choose Possibility. And in it, she challenged the male-dominated tech community to increase the rate of progress for women by leveraging its wealth of female talent. And tonight, we're here to celebrate her new book, Choose Possibility, Take Risks and Thrive, Even When You Fail, an ode to the opportunity and life born from calculated risk-taking. But before we start, I'd like to remind the audience that if you would like to ask us a question, please ask it in the chat or comment section. And we're going to try and get to as many questions as possible towards the end of the program. So glad you're here tonight. So let's get started. Sukhinder, great to be here with you.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to do this.
Yeah. Hey, congratulations. You wrote a book. You finished.
I know.
Right?
I know. Everyone's like, you wrote a book. Are you going to write another one? I was like, it took me a lot to birth this one. So
yeah, no kidding,
why don't you
right?
ask me in 12 months? But I understand that, most of us think we can never write a book. And all I would say to people is you don't think you can do it until you sit down to write. And then somehow many months later, you have one. So I assure you, if I can do it, anyone can do it.
Anyway, how long did it take you?
I put it on a rather compressed time frame. So I promised our publisher a book in 6 months, but I was very lucky to have a co-writer who worked with me. And, I was writing, he was editing and researching. And so we just jammed.
I love it. Well, we want to dive in here with about 45 minutes of just a conversation with some questions about your book, which I had the pleasure of being able to look through and pick out some themes. And I want to start about you, right? We want to know who you are. And it's easy for us to look at your bio or look at your career path, but who are you as a person? Like, how are you showing up here today?
Well, I think how I show up at work and how I show up are probably not that different. I am enthusiastic, high energy. I'm somebody who likes to take in a lot of information and process things at the same time. I'm somebody who likes to parallel process and always be busy. I'm somebody who cares deeply about showing up authentically and just, trying to have impact in everything I do. I'm a mom of 3 kids and, the only other passion I have besides work is obviously my children, who I adore. And I guess I'm somebody who feels like pretty grateful. I have lived a life where possibility was possible for me. And I completely appreciate that. And, and that's sort of my perspective on the book. I don't claim to be have come from a challenge background, but I feel grateful that I had possibility. And if I can pass more possibility on to others, I think that's an opportunity.
Let's dive into the book a little bit. I really appreciated that you talked about, in ALF, we talk about practicing mindfulness and presence and really knowing ourselves and self-awareness. Mm-hmm. And I love that in your book, you talk about the self-awareness sandwich. Right?
Yes.
So passion, superpowers, and values. So talk to us a little bit about that. How did you come to those 3 sort of pinnacles of self-awareness, and what are they for you?
Well, it's interesting you asked. As I've talked to leaders over the years, because obviously as I've grown up as an executive, I've had the opportunity to give talks. I always say to people, "What are your superpowers?" And on average, whether that room is filled with people who are new grads or people who are CEOs, only about a quarter of the people in the room put up their hand. And I never know, is that like modesty that is keeping you from saying, I don't know what my superpowers are? Because for me as a leader, I actually think not knowing what I'm good at and what I'm not good at is actually crippling. If I think about building an organization around me as a founder, as a CEO, that is going to do its best work, not knowing who you are and what you're injecting into the equation to me feels rather risky, for lack of a better word. So, from being a founder, being a CEO or an executive, I've had sort of self-awareness pounded into me over years and years of 360 reviews. But as I said, what I appreciate is we are an ingredient in the equation, any equation we're a part of. So I think that claiming what we're great at and claiming what we need to become better at or need to complement ourselves with is kind of essential to creating any winning strategy. For me, I would say that, if you were to think about those three things, my superpowers, I talked about them a little bit. And by the way, superpowers and areas of development are often pretty mirrored, right? I am a highly passionate person who I think brings energy and, hopefully a level of excitement and can get people excited. That's great. The downside of that, by the way, is I'm impatient. I often rush people along, right? So, but my superpower is, I can motivate people. I can motivate people and bring energy to any situation. Probably another superpower is what we talked about. I actually can consume information very fast and distill it. And that happens to be something I'm good at. So that's at the kind of a superficial level. Those are my gifts, I think of. My values are actually something more deep for me there. And I say to people, your values are what you think is just and fair in the world. Like if everybody conducted themselves this way, you would find yourself feeling safe and included. And for me, one of my biggest values is authenticity. I sort of am like, I want to show up as who I am. I want others to show up as what they are. I love candor. I love transparency. I believe the world is more fair and just when we each show up as who we are, as opposed to trying to be, someone else. So authenticity is kind of a key value for me. Another value for me is probably, and it's between a superpower and a value is hustle. Like I believe that we are, entitled to nothing in this world. And that, every day we should strive to show up, and make the most of what we have because we all have limited time here. And so hustle and authenticity are probably my values. My superpowers are probably what we talked about. And then my passion is building. I love to build stuff. I love to build products that people use. Yeah. I love building, companies with a group of people and feeling like we went on a mission together. My entire career has been about building. So clearly that's a passion for me.
Right. And you touched on this, that, if we've learned nothing else over the last couple of years, this isn't a dress rehearsal, right? And we only have today, and how do we make it count? So I appreciate that value and that passion as well. And yet, we all have our kryptonite, and you point that out in the book, right? So know your own kryptonite. So it loosens the power that it has over you. I mean, that's another piece of being, self-aware and being able to examine your authentic self, right? So talk to us a little bit about what's your kryptonite? How did you move through exploring that and being able to move past it?
Well, it's interesting. I don't think you're ever done with your kryptonite. I think it just keeps showing up again and again. But not only is there power in knowing it, often we don't take risks in our lives because we fear failure and how we may look to others. Once you understand not just your superpowers, but your kryptonite, one of the magical things that happens is you actually feel a little more free to take risks because you've sort of confronted those things in your ego. Your ego's confronted those things that might scare you, if that makes sense. So there's actually an inherent relationship between being able to take more risk and understanding your weaknesses and looking at them. So my kryptonite, I identified it. I'm highly impatient. I can be with people who believe that I am rushing them through a moment and that I'm not present because my mind is cycling and I'm like trying to I'm pushing them to get their next word out. So you can imagine that doesn't necessarily make people feel steady. For some people, it makes them feel like I'm just hurrying them, through a process. So that's one sort of like one big area of kryptonite for me. The other is And I think I can talk about how I've learned to tame both of these, but they're still there. The other is like that passion also shows up as emotionality, right? Like there are days when, that passion can, make me very emotional on the topic. And while people appreciate that passion in the good times, it also means it's very hard to hide how I'm feeling about something. And when you think about having a leader and like you want a leader to be steady at the helm, right? You can imagine that an emotional leader has the potential to evoke like anxiety among the team. And so for me, like knowing those two things, and they show up in every performance review all the time. Like, I mean, I now I just try and claim them as my own and admit them to the people who are going to work with me. I think over the years on that sort of impatience, I literally have to sometimes kind of take a physical action to move myself out of one mode and into another. So if I want to be a better listener, as an example, and not be cycling in my head. Sometimes with my teams, I need to pick up a pen and go to the whiteboard and move to like the scribe. And when I'm the scribe, people feel free, right, to express their own ideas, if that makes sense. So that's like one tactic I've used. And when I'm emotional, look, I can tell you, having a family to put things in perspectives really helps. And I do all the things you might expect. I never write something I'm upset about in email, ever. I would rather just have a conversation with something. And if I'm really upset about something, I just don't do anything like till the next morning at the earliest, often 24 hours. And if it's really bothering me, I wait till like the following Monday, because I know by then, like I will cycle through whatever emotion I'm feeling and be in a better position to respond. So for me, time cures a lot. But those are the types of tactics I employ to, deal with my own weaknesses, but they never go away.
Yeah,
they never go away.
It's the awareness. And like you said, having those tips and tricks, like what are your triggers? And now how do I respond to that? It's being able to pause right before you actually take the next action, which sometimes inaction too is your best friend.
Absolutely.
Breath, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. For somebody like me, inaction is the tactic, even though this book is all about taking action.
Yeah. Right.
For me, it's quite, it's quite like inaction is the key thing to do.
On a personal level too, I would love to hear, you talk a lot about your career and your choices and what you went through. And I want to dig into that a little bit too, but want to call out just, this badge of honor of failure in Silicon Valley, right? That failure is something that we are supposed to move through. It's supposed to happen to us here in Silicon Valley, but it's spiritually and emotionally gut wrenching, right? It just is on a human level. So, would you be willing to share with us just a moment when you had that moment of failure and how you recovered through it? And I'd be curious too, as you've gotten older and wiser, right? What role does age and experience play in your ability to have capacity, right, to be able to handle those bumps in the road?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the failures I've talked about publicly, and it's certainly a big one. I was at Google. For many people who are familiar with my career, not that you are, but if you are, I was at Google for 6 years and helped build the Asia Pacific and Latin America region. And I was one of Google's most senior executives. So had a great career run and wanted to leave Google because I was never going to be CEO. Business people don't become CEOs at Google. It's really product or engineering driven folks. And in fact, Sundar came from product and engineering. So like many of my compatriots, Sheryl Sandberg and Tim Armstrong, just some amazing leaders, I was thinking about my next act because I knew I would never be CEO of Google. And so I left and I decided to go back to a startup. I took 9 months. You can read about it in the book. I studied. I knew I wanted to pivot into e-commerce. It was an area of passion for me. I thought it was getting reinvented, like the whole idea of commerce and inspiration online. And I ultimately chose what I thought was very wisely a company that had been pursuing me, Polyvore, a 10-person startup. And I left a business that was, I'd grown it to several billion, 2,000 people in the region, like at the peak of my career. And I joined a startup as the CEO. And within 6 months, I was out. I mean, I was out. The founder and I, while very intellectually well matched, once I was inside the company, had, I would just say, different values in how we operated. It was like a marriage that wasn't working. And he ultimately said to the board that it was him or me. And the board chose him. And you can imagine for somebody who has had kind of career success I'd had until that point, first of all, to lose in a battle like that was painful. I had the option, I guess, to stay and fight, but like my mentors were like, why would you want to do that? You have a values mismatch with, this organization and this person. And it's like, it may be worth more to that person than it is to you. But mostly I was humiliated. I was like, wow, I just took one of the most public risks I could. I was fairly high profile at the time, and I failed at my first CEO job. And so I'll talk about how I recovered, but there's a difference between, and I've had multiple failures in my career. I had a video commerce startup, Joyous,
Right.
10 years before all the new wave of video commerce companies just emerged in 2020 and 2021 and are becoming unicorns. I had one
Right.
10 years ago, and I couldn't get it funded after 7 years because its metrics were good, but not great. But the difference was in the Polywar case, when we fail and we've had no impact, it's just much more gut wrenching than when you've been at something and you gave it your best effort and you were able to produce some results, right? And maybe not the results you wanted, but you like literally left it all on the table, right?
Right.
I didn't get the chance to leave it all on the table at Polywar. I was in and out and I had no impact on that business. So that kind of failure is not only public, but it's gut wrenching when we fail to even achieve the type of impact we think we're capable of, versus we achieved impact, but we still didn't get the results we wanted. And they're very different, how you feel about those things. So what did I do? Well, I did what I always do. In times when I am feeling very low, I retrench. I really do not want to talk to anybody that in a fragile moment for me can make me feel more fragile. I remember I think I flew home and saw my mom in Canada. I cried my eyes out, and I relied on my family and my husband, certainly. I remember talking to my priest, and he asked me how work was going, and I totally lost it. And his advice to me in the moment, I remember it because at the time my son was about a year old, not even, maybe he's 9 months. And I remember him reassuring me that things would be okay. And then at that moment, like the good news was that my son needed me. It was just a simple reminder that like, here I am stressing about what's going to happen in my career. And he's like, you have this newborn at home who's 9 months and like, he needs you right now. And of course there'll be another opportunity. But I withdrew from every event in the Valley. I didn't go to any mixers. I didn't socialize. I wasn't on email. I literally, just hid because I really couldn't take in that moment anybody asking me. I was going to break down if they asked. And I actually was feeling like, when we're feeling vulnerable, I don't actually need people who make me feel more vulnerable. I don't need those questions. And so I typically in those moments, I retrench. And I'm always so grateful for my family because it gives me perspective. They're the people who love me despite my career, not for my career, despite my career, because my career drives them crazy, right? It's mostly that they remember the other side of me and they help me remember the other side of me. So that's often how I cope. I just stay out until I'm like, can feel like I can reinforce who I am and what I care about, and then get back into the ring.
And time heals, right?
Yeah. And time heals. Time and perspective. I mean, more than time is one, perspective is another. Like I feel incredibly lucky that I come from a family that grew up with a lot of religion. And so ultimately, these things may shake me, but a little time with my family and kind of, at least for me, spirituality is part of how I grew up. Like I can remember what it's all about and I just need to adjust my perspective. Once I get it back, I'm good. It doesn't mean I'm not in pain, but I am stable. And then I want to go for it again.
Great advice. Great reminders too on perspective. I mean, all we have to do is look around the world right now or in Northern California or right.
Yeah.
What really matters. And when you have a 9-month-old crying and needing a diaper changed, it all comes home, right?
It all comes home. He really doesn't care that I just got fired. I mean, he's like,
pretty much.
He's like, hey mom, what about me? And I'm like, what about you? That's a good reminder. You're why I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned your priest and you mentioned your spirituality, which I really appreciate how grounding that can be, right? Especially when we're at our bottom. And you actually, I love how you put an idea in your book about having those professional priests, right? So you talked about, how going to your family when you're trying to make a decision, and, I can so relate to this, just talking to my husband till he's, ready to fall off the bar stool going, really, do we have to go rehash the pros and cons list again? Because I'm done. Right. So
absolutely,
that having a combination of, people that love and care for you, that you're not going to burn out and have capacity, right? Who are those people? I mean, how did you identify that team, and how might some of our viewers or listeners find those resources for themselves in the decision-making process?
Well, first of all, you hit the nail on the head. As you can probably tell from that conversation, I'm not a believer that our families are there to be our work therapists, because, we risk draining from those relationships everything that we're meant to give to them as well. So while my family has been a tremendous support, pretty early on, I realized as I was going through work pressures that if all I ever talked with my husband about was what, my obsessions in my head, like that was a pretty unhealthy way to conduct a marriage. And so I think it was maybe I was in my late 30s and I actually went to a classic place, which a lot of people do. I went to YPO, because YPO is one of
Sure.
these, there are often a lot of communities that exist for, for your, let's say, if you're a product manager, there are product manager forums, there are many professional networks now that each of us can be a part of. And for me, I joined YPO. And interestingly, I found that YPO was a lot of time that I didn't have to give. But through the YPO process, I met a coach who, was coaching the YPO
Okay.
forums, including mine. And I really loved dealing with him. So I said, "Hey, David, would you be my coach?" And I actually withdrew from YPO, not having the time, but I kept the coach. And so David has been, is a professional executive coach, and I've used him for 10 years. So I literally do pay somebody to listen to me bitch. Excuse my language. Like I believe
Right.
it's like probably the healthiest thing I can do for my family is to have somebody to go to who can give me perspective, who obviously works with other CEOs. But then the other thing I did, and in my professional life, I've been lucky enough to have many women here in the Valley who have grown up in a similar era as me, had children at the same time, ascended in their own careers. And I think I have drawn closer to several of them. And, it's not that they're not my best friends. They're good friends. They're different from the women I may go, hang out with on the weekends or play tennis with. And of course, I somewhat
Right.
socialize with them. But there are a lot of professional women who I met who I feel like can identify with some of my struggles. And at least two or three of them I've continued to go back to. And we've developed friendships that are a mix of like work advice, and like family advice. And I think that those relationships are pretty unique for me because I do feel like they know what I'm going through at work. And I really count on their judgment because they live in a similar professional sphere to me, and they have a lot of knowledge about
For
the
sure.
types of choices I'm considering.
What a gift to have that too, to have that tribe, have that team, right?
Well,
We
and you
all,
said like, how do
yeah,
we all find them? I think the good news for us is if you would look for a professional priest, I would look for people that you have worked with, that you've been collegial with, that could have been a partner or somebody,
yeah,
at work that's in another group that's similarly situated. And, invite them to coffee, cultivate a relationship with people who can give you sound advice, but maybe are not vested on the outcome of what you do. And that is sort of the distinction with our families. They're often like, they need other things from us, but they're also so close to the situation that sometimes it's not objective advice.
for sure. For sure. No, great reminders. I want to dive into the primary theme of your book, right, which is choosing possibility, and this whole idea of we often trap ourselves, right, with these binary choices that
Mhm.
and which is debilitating, instead
Mhm.
of being able to really, how I would say, kind of sense the whole landscape, sense the possibilities, and not close yourself off.
Mhm.
um, how long does it take you? How long does it take you to kind of go through that discernment process, weighing the costs? I mean, you are so methodical about it. I have a pros and cons list, and you have charts and graphs and alternative models. I was loving
Yep.
it. It's very
Yep.
methodical. So, I mean, how long should one, go through really weighing those risks? And is there a benefit of just sitting on it for some time?
Well, I think the way I think about risk taking is, first of all, I believe everybody can become a risk taker. That's like the most
Yeah.
important nugget in all of this, right? And we tend to think, as you said, of risks as very binary, these large choices. But to be clear, I'm actually pretty bimodal. When it comes to small risks, I take them quite easily. Like because and a risk for me, and when I say small risk, what do we mean by micro risk? It might be researching a new job, it might be taking an interview, it might be speaking up at work when you feel uncomfortable in a meeting. These are all the types of little risks we can take every day to discover, to learn, to try and have just a little bit more impact, right, if we're willing to put ourselves out there. So actually I don't do very much thinking about those at all, because what I realize, and I think for most people, some of these little risks, I realize that most of those risks I can walk back from. I do something, I get it wrong, I can always apologize. I make a fool of myself today. Tomorrow, maybe I'll say something witty. So I think on small risk taking, I'm a big fan of like, yeah, do a minute by minute assessment. Like, what's the real cost, and take the leap, because at a minimum, you're going to build these muscles, right, of just a feedback loop. And like failure starts to become a little less scary when you kind of take little risks all the time. On the bigger risks, and you identified this, I'm somebody who gives myself a time frame. So I think the difference between sort of endlessly cycling and not is often a time frame. I'm in a career transition right now, right? I wrote a book. I left StubHub a year ago. At some point here, I'll need another full-time job. And you're right. I'm in discernment mode. But I think the thing I like to do, and I sort of encourage everyone to do, is sometimes uncertainty feels so uncomfortable that we want to make the first choice. And for me, I find it difficult to make a choice of one of one. To me, that seems like very risky. It seems very risky to me to choose only from one thing. So I always go through a process of what I call parallel pipelining. I am taking risks all over the place just to discover. I'm pushing like 10 carts up a hill while like sort of like dating a lot of people while marrying no one. And I want to push every opportunity as far as it can go. So I see all the possibilities, relatively speaking, in some considered period of time. Let's say over a 6-month span. I'm like, okay, they may not all land at once, but if I'm iterating through possibilities, I'm building up my knowledge until I've seen enough that I can be like, okay, now I see the landscape. Now I'm ready to choose. And I understand that like life is not that perfect. I've often had opportunities presented to me where they're one of one, right? But most often we can find even a little bit of time, even a week or 2 weeks, to validate some of the choices that are in front of us by just seeing what else is possible. And that's what I encourage people to do on big choices, which is like, how about before you choose, you generate choices? So you have one choice. That's awesome. Now, if you could spend 2 weeks generating 5 more, it's either going to give you conviction about your choice, or you're going to realize that you're pursuing something because it's the only option rather than meeting your goals. So you're right. I'm a choice builder before I'm a choice maker on big choices.
Perfect advice. That is fantastic. I love that. And, many of us just go by gut instinct, right? What's our gut instinct? You hear that,
Yes.
What do you feel in your gut? But you have this other formula of gut, data, gut. Talk to us about how that works.
Sure. So if anything, now that I'm older, and you asked in the previous question, what role does age play? Age plays a couple of roles in almost everything, which is just that it's not like you're so old and wise, but once you've seen something cycle, and once you've seen cycles repeat, you have pattern recognition. So I know many people think like something is a gut feeling, and I believe in my gut strongly. But sometimes I realize that my gut is really like some pattern I've seen before that I'm worried is going to happen again. Right. So like a perfect example, I'll take a risk and hire someone who maybe everybody else is not in favor of on the team. And then that person, is acting really strangely. They say they want the job, but they don't send back the offer letter. And by the way, I've had these situations before. And then my gut is starting to ring. I'm like, oh, like something about the way this is unfolding, I can predict like this is not a good sign. And, inevitably that person a day before the job starts rescinds the offer and says like, I'm sorry, I decided to take another job, even though I signed your offer letter. And like, right, that's just like pattern matching. So I might say, oh, my gut was ringing, but that's like pattern matching. So I believe that when we're young, one of the reasons choices are so difficult is because we don't have that much experience to pattern match, right? So we don't know what our gut is telling us. Like it's really hard to discern. And then of course, like looking to the data, I always look to the data as we talked about. I try and do my pros and cons list. I try and make a calculated choice. But at the end, if my gut is ringing again, then I want to honor it a little bit because my gut is telling me that in some data set, there is a piece of data that I'm just not paying attention to. That piece of data might be, I've seen something that looks like this movie before and it didn't work out. And something about this situation is giving me the same, patterns. So I think often gut is patterns. I like to honor my gut, but honoring your gut without data, it's like, it's sort of, again, like I guess I would just say that's a very uncalculated risk to take. I'd say if you want to make a smart risk, like lay out all the data and then listen to your gut and try and identify why is your gut ringing on an issue. And often you'll come back to some pattern from your past that it's really just like a secret piece of data hiding in your head that shows up in the form of a gut reaction to something.
I love that. That's great. Yeah. And the more data we have or the more experience we have, right, that gut kind of ringing can happen. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It just means you've got more to pull from. You've got more memory.
Exactly.
Experience.
It's just like, gut is like your muscle memory, just chirping away at you in the back. And you can't quite put your thumb on what it's saying, but it's coming from a pattern you've seen before.
Okay, I have to ask you this question because as someone that's been through leadership challenges or different, hard decisions, right? I often see signs from the universe, right? Sometimes it's just like, Okay. Yeah,
Mhm.
that would not, okay. I know which way I have to. Do you believe in that? Have you seen that? Do you have any good stories about just sort of, you do all your homework, you do the footwork, you write your list, you analyze, you create more choices, as you said, and then it's clear based on what lands in your lap or what the universe says that, okay, I know where I need to go.
Yes, I mean, I do actually believe in what the universe tells you. And maybe it's because, as I said, I was raised in somewhat of a spiritual family. So the irony of my upbringing is that my father was a maker and he believed in possibility. And sort of on the one hand, made me feel like I could do anything. He was an entrepreneur and a
Mm,
doctor. Yet on the other hand, my father spent kind of all his time telling us, like, okay, like while you're out there, ambitiously trying, like, you know, it's all in God's plan. So, like, whatever you're
right,
thinking,
right.
guess what? You're like an ant on the back of an elephant. So, it's rather ironic that, I felt like I grew up very empowered. And my father was, always encouraging me to try new possibilities. Yet he kind of was always, also saying to us, like, yeah, you think you control it all, but guess what? There was like a higher power, and good luck with that
Divine plan.
strategy.
Yeah, right.
There's a plan behind the plan. So, like, you can do all you want, but you can't control the outcome. So I will say that at least on several occasions in my life, whether it was the, oh my God, the star said I should go this way, I don't know if I have that example, but I'd say it more like my father said to me, and I believe it to be true, that sometimes I would keep pushing on something just so I could push it my way. And only when I
Interesting.
let go of the outcome, literally let go of the outcome, did things work out. When my first instinct might be, like, I'm just going to grind my way through that thing. I can control everything. And I think
Right.
in my career, I've learned, like, there are things you just can't control. And sometimes the best you can do is, put in your best effort, lay every card on the table, and then just step back. And to your point, the universe is, and other forces are at work. And when things land, you'll see where they land for a reason, right? Um,
Yeah.
so I've had that happen multiple times in my career, times when I was ready to go to battle. I remember at least once at Google when somebody was like trying to like take over my territory and they were going to go battling on a Friday. I was like, I'm going to go in there and like tell my boss what's what. And, instead I just like settled down and I was like, if my boss wants to listen to this person who's just machinating in politics, why I have built this region and like I have put everything into it and I have results to deliver it, if I think that's the way he's going to go, I'm just going to leave it with him and trust him. And sure enough, by that Monday, like the person who was sort of trying to take my territory didn't succeed. And, my boss
Right.
showed the trust in me that I should have thought he had rather than sort of pushing him to the brink of like, what are you going to do? And so, like,
Yeah.
just letting it go and letting it fall and see what he would do. That was at least one example. And in Polygore, I mean, I went to my professional priest when, that situation was a mess.
Right.
And they were like, they sort of just reminded me, like, look, the universe is telling you what kind of values exist in an organization and a set of people that could treat you this way. And is that really something you want to be a part of? And so, like, they really encouraged me to just let go, like to just let go, right? And
Yeah.
understand that even that was happening for a reason. Maybe it was meant to show me that I really was not a fit there. So I believe in those kinds of things. Yes.
I love it. And you have it back to self-awareness, right? You have to have that sort of being tuned in to
Hmm.
who you are authentically, to be able to hear and see those sorts of signs and
Hmm.
read them for what they are, right?
Yeah. I mean, often we don't want to read them, right? Because they go in the
Yeah,
face of what we want to happen. And I'm as
exactly.
guilty as that as anyone. But as I
Right.
said, sometimes you just have to let go.
Yeah. No, for sure. Let's switch gears and talk about fear, my favorite topic.
Sure.
So how do and so much of what we're talking about is about fear of risk, fear
Mhm.
of failure, right? How do
Mhm.
you develop a habit of taking a step back and thinking about the worst case scenario as you're embroiled in this decision making or discernment? And do you do that to lessen your fear? Does that work?
Oh, it does work. I'm gonna say that it absolutely does work. So I discovered a few years ago when I was having a conversation with my coach, right? Because I've been through career transitions and worried that they wouldn't work if I went to a startup, whatever. You can imagine how I
Right.
felt post Polyvore. I was like, oh my God, if I take another risk again and it doesn't work out, what's going to happen to me? Um, but he actually had a phrase for me which I really appreciated, which is why I think I do it and why I think it's possible. He said, "Sukinder, most people have an immature relationship with their inner risk manager." And I'm like, "What do you
Mm.
mean?" And he said, like, inside of all of us is some voice that's trying to keep us safe. Like that's actually really, that's a voice that's there for a reason, right? It might prevent us from doing something really crazy or taking, putting our
Sure.
lives in jeopardy. But it's also the nagging sort of like, don't do this, don't do this. So he said, instead of ignoring it, what would happen if you invited your risk manager to a conversation? And literally, he did this exercise with me a few years ago where he had my risk manager in one chair and I was in the other, and I was supposed to have a conversation with it, which I know seems hokey. But trust me, in that conversation, what came up from my inner risk manager is like, hey, the way I keep Sukhinder safe is like, before I make a choice, I always want to list, like, I want to look at the worst case scenario and make sure I can handle it. And if I can handle it, then I can make the choice. And I have kind of learned to honor that if that's my way of feeling empowered to make a choice, if that comes from me going like, okay, if I fail, what happens? Do I have 5 more options I can exercise? If I think through those now, right? Then it's weird that by looking through a failure and saying, what happens on the other side? How many more choices are available to me? I get comfort from knowing that if
Yeah.
I looked on the other side, I could know what the worst case was and if I could handle it. And if I have many more choices, it's likely not as big a risk as I think. If I only have one choice, it's probably a pretty big risk and I want to be considered, but I want to still play it out. So my inner risk manager taught me is that's always the voice in my head. And interestingly, I've been able to take, I would say, a decent amount of risk in my life, including after a failure. I've taken more risks.
Right.
So I do believe it works because I believe that kind of it's relatively easy for people to, let's say, get your what I call your FOMO going, your fear of missing out. This visualizing the positive. People want to visualize the positive, right? Visualize, visualize, visualize. But the minute something doesn't go the way they plan, they really are quite shaken. And so for
Mm.
me, when I can look at a choice and plan for volatility, I'm like, it's not going to go exactly how I would predict. It might go mostly like how I predicted, great. But if it doesn't go like how I predicted, I want to know that I can deal with the volatility on the other side. For me, I have comfort then in knowing I can deal with volatility. I think when people are like, I made a plan, it's perfect, I visualized only the positive, and then the minute one thing doesn't go the way they plan, they risk being like really shaken and it shakes their faith in themselves. And I'm like, actually, risks, the definition of risk is uncertainty. Like there's
That's
no
right.
certain situation. So for me, I find that tactic is probably a more useful tool to shrink your fear of failure. And I always say, if your fear of missing out is greater than your fear of failure, you will act. If your fear of failure is greater than your fear of missing out, you won't act. But most people think they just need to ramp their FOMO, like just visualize the positive. I'm like, if you spent your energy actually imagining the downside and knowing you would have 5 more choices to make, maybe that shrinks your fear enough to act.
Right. Right. I loved that comparison or that sort of that frame of the FOMO versus the fear of failure and reading that. I'm curious though, because I went through this exercise with myself a couple of years ago. Just what happens if I take fear out of my diet? Because fear, I mean,
Mhm.
irrational fear, right? If I'm being chased
Yes.
by a bear or a clown, yes, I will be afraid, right?
Yeah.
However, fear at times can also be paralyzing for people, right?
Yes.
So just from your experience and you're sort of
Mhm.
studying this so
Mhm.
deeply, does fear is fear always a part of the equation? Can it be debilitating? How can you make decisions that aren't fear based?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, um, I'm not sure, and maybe I am
Yeah.
naive. I'm not sure I know people who have no fear. I really like. I,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's just about the size of the fear. So I think that what
Mm,
happens when we take little risks. So you say, well, how would you prevent fear from being debilitating? I think the
right.
best actually cure for fear being debilitating is taking little risks and experiencing like micro
Mm,
successes and
sure.
micro failures because you sort of become indoctrinated to it. In my career, I actually grew up in sales, right? And so in sales, it turns out that your expectation is, and on average, it doesn't work out. Literally,
Right.
you are pipelining, pipelining, pipelining with the knowledge that 2 out of every 10 opportunities may result actually in something that can meet your goal, right?
Right. Right.
But the good news about sales is it totally indoctrinates you to the idea of failure. You're like, okay, I tried. That person's not interested. I move on. And so for me, I don't know that I know people who have zero fear, but what I think is there are people who can put fear in perspective. And I think
Right.
putting fear in its proper perspective is the key thing. So I always say to people, name the fear, size the fear. And you can size the fear by knowing how many choices you have available if something fails. And I think I talked about this in the book. Jeff Bezos, when he wrote his shareholder letter and taking Amazon public, talked about why Amazon is so agile. And he said it's because Amazon knows the thing that, I know the thing that most people don't, which is that most of the decisions we make are what's called two-way doors. You can go through. If it doesn't work out, you can come back.
Right.
So
Yeah.
very few decisions are actually one-way doors. And I think knowing that is like really freeing. If you know you can go and come back, if you know that, you took a little risk, it didn't work out, and you can take another one tomorrow. I think that the things we can do to reduce fear are far more realistic than it ever going away. So I'm much more of a put fear in perspective person. And I do think what is debilitating is when fear grows in size above its proportions. And I think that happens a lot for people. I think they imagine the worst, right? And I'm like, okay, just
Sure.
practice taking little risks and just add up the ones that worked out and the ones that didn't. And the ones that didn't, like, really, what was the damage done? And I think when people do that, they sort of get indoctrinated to this idea, like, yeah, if it doesn't work out, like, move on. It's
Yeah.
data.
Yeah. Fail fast and recover, right? How do we take from this?
And I would say fail little and recover. Like,
Yeah.
have lots of little failures. Like, that's it's a lot easier to deal with those than a big failure. But it's also training your muscle, right?
Yep. No, for sure. For sure. You wrote, I think, practically a whole chapter really on proximity to opportunity, right? Proximity to opportunity being so critical in building those choices, right? Creating those choices and understanding what the full landscape is. Do you commit and encourage others to commit to bringing, women, people of color up and provide them with that proximity to opportunity? What does that look like for you? How are you intentional about that?
Sure. So first of all, I think you hit on the key, on one of the key words, right? When we want to achieve something or move towards something new, being proximate to it is so powerful. A, because we see the practitioners of that thing and how they do their work, and we can learn by osmosis. B, because just by being around, right, we not only absorb knowledge, but opportunities may show up, right? It's sort of like if you say, I want to be an entrepreneur, but you don't know how, but you go work in a startup, chances are you may be working with people who then start a company and invite you to join, right? So when we're proximate, we learn by osmosis, opportunities show up faster, we learn from masters, right? All of that happens. So I think you hit on the key point, right? When, I wrote this whole book on possibility, on, like, let's reframe risk as possibilities, as the pursuit of possibilities, in a serial manner. And the obvious question in the book is, well, if there's so much possibility, why do so many people have so little? Do you know what I mean? Like, literally. So I think we can acknowledge that possibility, just because it's abundant, it doesn't mean it's being equally distributed. Because to your point, some people have access and some people do not have access systemically. And so I think in my own life, what I've come to realize is, first and foremost, for me and for others, what I say is, you're likely to be proximate and be able to take full advantage of opportunities when you put yourself in environments that have shared values with who you are. And what I mean by that is, I think there's bias and discrimination everywhere. I'm sure I'm biased. I mean, we all carry bias, right?
Habit, yeah.
But yes, we all do. It's habit. And see, we all have our own preconceived notions. But when we're in tribes of people who we think have a similar worldview of what's just and fair, we can even have the conversation about bias. We can take that risk, right? And believe that everybody has the same intention to create equal access. When we feel that we're in an environment that is unsafe and everybody doesn't share the same value system, it's unlikely we'd ever even try and solve discrimination or bias. So I just want to make that point. For me, I feel like I have mostly been able to pursue possibility because I've been in environments and chosen to working environments where I have a values fit. But I think it goes further than that. So you say, how am I intentional? I think for me, I don't know that I wouldn't say I'm very intentional about the teams I build, in the sense that I treat the men and women equally. I don't presume the women on my team or the people of color are any less ambitious or what. I mean, I'm equally brutal. Let's put it that way.
Right.
But what I've been told and what I appreciate is simply being a female leader who shows up authentically to work and doesn't mind talking about their kids. And, when I was at Google, my daughter flew with me around the world. Like, my entire team saw it. Like, that's what it took to be a mother and to run an international operation. What I've heard back is, although I may not viscerally say, well, I'm going to do this for this class of employees, or, what I have done is strive to be somebody who shows up authentically as a person of color, as a mother, as somebody who wants to be a kick-ass leader and win, and that you can hold all those things together. And I want to give license to the people around me to show up authentically as who they are. Like, mostly I want to create environments where people feel like, yes, I can be who I am and it's safe to be who I am. That is like, I think that what is my work as a leader, right? To make sure that the environments I create are environments where people feel safe, because if you feel safe, you'll take risks. That's the way I know how to show up, but I don't really think it's like, and of course I do all the things that people talk about. Yes, do we look at the ratios on diversity and all this? Of course we do.
Right.
But,
Right,
do we
sure.
build, diverse pipelines? But that's like the hard stuff. The soft stuff as a leader is like, how do you model imperfection and authenticity
That's
and,
right.
and signal what your own values are in order to make people feel comfortable, when they show up, that
Yeah.
they can show up fully. I think that's really,
Well,
really
and
important.
we look at too, no, I appreciate that the example that you're setting, right, is that this is okay, that we have lives, we have kids, right? And I'm just looking at this mass, exodus that everyone's talking about of the workforce during shelter in place of women, right? And so, I mean, really I think the conditions are going to have to change, right? So that we get
Mhm,
that talent back. And so
mhm.
do you see sort of a trend towards more flexibility to get more women back and in? Because there's so much talent right now out there that unfortunately we've lost temporarily, hopefully.
Yeah, I would say that I see multiple tailwinds and still some headwinds, to
Mm,
kind of the environment. So the tailwinds are, look, we just lived and continue to live a year where everybody saw everybody's home life. Any scenario that a leader was perfect, went out the window when their kid came, like racing through the door, screaming something, while you're trying to
right.
look like the perfect leader, right? So I think first of all, I think we've kind of have a massive tailwind on workforce flexibility, like because everybody finally has some empathy for what it means to sort of
Right.
manage your full life, and it's all been on display. So that's a tailwind.
Exactly.
That means like if you're sort of thinking about how do you create a more flexible workspace, or you're somebody craving more flexibility, there may be far more license to ask and receive than we've had in previous eras where we felt like you keep your home life at home and your work life at work.
Right.
And, okay, so that's a tailwind. Check. Number two, obviously the founder of the board list, where we put, we try and we're a marketplace that creates board opportunities for people of color and
Sure.
women. There's massive tailwinds on pressure to create diversity in leadership and all through the organization. So, i.e., to increase the ranks, right, from the every level of the organization all the way to the boardroom of kind of diverse populations, right, at work. And that's a
Mm,
result of societal pressure, changing demographics of work, changing demographics of your customer base, technology disruption, right? So the good news is, again, there's a lot more that is being done to try and bring, all the talent available into, all the world's companies. That's
yeah.
great. Now,
Yeah.
what's the headwind? The headwind is if you want women to fully participate in work, caregiving
Right.
continues to be a massive crisis, right? So
Huge. Yep.
I love what Biden is trying to do with the infrastructure bill. Whatever you think about the rest of the infrastructure bill, we can agree that it's the first attempt, made to actually address caregiving, is like the infrastructure needed for our economy. I mean, the fact that we don't at this point still have a national family leave act is ridiculous, that only can you get
Yeah.
those protections state by state. So the challenge of this moment is that caregiving needs to be solved. Now, kids are going back to school, so that's one way, that women can start to participate more
And hopefully
fully, as
staying
opposed to,
there.
yeah, and hopefully staying there.
Yeah.
But many still have older parents, and the board list just did a survey on this. Women are
Right.
still predominantly the caregivers at home, even though men are picking up some of the slack. It's not all. So I think the headwind is, unless we create more infrastructure and support for caregiving, it's very difficult. And you can say that's a government's problem. I could say it's also the problem of like every wealthy corporation out there. If you have a lot of money and you
That's right.
want all the world's
Yeah.
talent to show up and you want women to stay in and make it to the leadership ranks, you have to make it possible. So, what can you do to solve the caregiving crisis as a corporate leader? Like, that is your opportunity.
I want to close here before we get to audience questions with one of your quotes here that I just love. Understanding that having choices in life is a privilege. That is critical, right? And you should choose to exercise them, right? In our privilege. So, Kendra, it's so wonderful to talk to you. And I'm excited to get to some audience questions here. I see them floating in the chat. So I'm going to switch gears here and start with this one um, that I think is interesting. And I'm curious your answer to this. Do you think you handle risk differently as a woman? And how can men support women who are often socialized to minimize risk? Your thoughts on that?
So I'll tell you what the research says versus
Mhm.
me. The research says, and there's a lot of research on gender and risk taking. the research suggests, I found one analysis, believe it or not, of 150 different individual studies on gender and risk taking. And that meta-analysis said that on 14 of 16 dimensions, women actually do take less risk than men. It also noted that men are more indiscriminate in their risk taking and take risks when they shouldn't, and women are less likely to take risks that are relatively innocuous and good, i.e., little risks.
Right.
And so the research says, despite like however I show up or not, the research says that there is actually a risk-taking difference between men and women. The hope though, and I want to come to it when we think about what we can do to support, more risk-taking from diverse populations, is the thing that's most interesting is it said it's not absolute. It actually diminishes, those differences diminish with age and experience, which is great. And it also says that and suggests that context matters. So people are more likely to take risk in A, context that they care about, and B, context where they think they'll be successful. So, and the converse of that is there's also research that shows, and then I'll come to answering your question, that in fact, the self-fulfilling prophecy of women act in the way that they are perceived, because there's a perception that women take less risk, there is in fact research suggests that they then take less risk. So what does that mean for all of you? If you're a man who is trying to create a supportive environment for women, I think it's A, how do you encourage their risk taking and presume their ambition is equal, as opposed to presuming the opposite? So, if the converse is that we carry a myth around and we perpetuate a myth that women are more risk averse, then in fact they act in ways that are more risk averse. If we as leaders perpetuate a reality that women have as much ambition and are as capable as men, and encourage them to take risk, as if it is their opportunity and not their lack, I think we can help, the leaders that the people that are in our teams feel more safe taking risk. So I think number one, clearly encouragement and validation of people striving, of women striving, of people of color striving. Like, this, words like she's too aggressive, like that is the opposite. That is the opposite of honoring somebody's ambition. I mean, no one would dare say that to a man ever. To say that somebody who's a person of color is aggressive because they flag an issue, like that is the type of word that kills possibility and reinforces the stereotypes that we're not interested in. So I think that's really important. Number two, when you know this, I think it's like follow the numbers. Like, the one thing if we're a leader is the numbers don't lie. And so, when the numbers in your organization suggest that women are being promoted at a lesser rate than men, or people of color are being promoted at a lesser rate than people who are white, like follow the data and ask questions, show up and just be curious, go have the conversations. And I know that it's a time that's fraught with risk where, I know that if you're a man and you're white, you might think, God, even opening up that conversation, like I don't mean to, but I could offend somebody or expose someone. I always say to, people of color and women as well, like, look, it's pretty hard moving through the world with a chip on your shoulder. Bias exists, but if you can presume, if you're in an environment of shared values, presume positive intent, because no one's going to be perfect. So I say, like, again, if you're in an environment where you think mostly people show up and are good people and share your value system, then, presume the positive intent of the person who's asking, even if they don't ask perfectly. They're just trying to figure it out,
Yeah.
So
I think have that courageous conversation, right?
Yeah, have the courageous conversation, and have some forgiveness if you are a person of color or a woman. Not forgiveness of microaggression, but forgiveness of people who are just trying to ask and learn, and they may not do it perfectly, but look for what their intention is in that moment.
One of my mantras this year has been grace, empathy, and flexibility. Grace, empathy, and flexibility, right? Just to get through
Those
all
are
the
great
change.
ones. Yeah.
I mean, yes. And they continue into 2021, Sukhinder, let me tell you. Is there an instance, right? Are there instances when you would say FOMO does more harm than good? That's one of our audience questions here. Your thoughts on that?
I'll tell you, I think that there are. On the website for the book, there's something fun everybody in the audience can do. They can take a risk quiz, which really, was, by the way, it wasn't done by scientists, it was done by me and my team, but it really creates 4 risk archetypes for, thinking about like, what's your natural risk-taking style? And one of those archetypes is what we call the change seeker. Okay. So the change seeker is the person who never misses out, right? Like, You might think they're having the most fun. They move pretty easily from thing to thing, right? Not much deters them. Sometimes you might call them impulsive, but they're going to have a lot of really great life experiences, right? I think if there is a downside to always living with just FOMO, that fear of missing out makes us sometimes jump from thing to thing to thing without ever having impact at the place where we're at. I think you guys
Right.
know this, like the shiny new penny. So of course I'm a risk taker and I get excited by new things, but mostly my career has been built on the fact that I want to master the thing I'm at and have impact before I make a next choice. And so, for me, as I've said before, I feel the most painful failures are when I didn't even have an impact. I didn't even literally, what was that for? Versus
Right.
the failures I've had where I strove, I had an impact I can point to and said, we accomplished this and this and this. And, the people who worked out, they're better off. Their careers accelerated, even if we didn't make this startup the world's most, biggest unicorn. So I really feel that when it comes to FOMO alone, its real risk is that you just keep jumping from thing to thing to thing and you never
That's right.
stay and keep choosing every day to take little risks to make an impact on the thing that you chose, right? So that bigger choice, once you choose it, you're not done. Then you actually have to go make a reality of whatever your dream is. And that's all about taking little risks and staying through the hard stuff. So yeah, I think the real risk of FOMO is you just keep moving from thing to thing, but
Yeah.
you never really deliver impact. And by the way, that's not a very fulfilling career. It might be a
At all.
risk-taking one, but it doesn't deliver
Yeah.
the goods.
Yeah, for sure. For you or others, right? Lack of satisfaction and being able to see
Absolutely.
the fruits of your labor and everything else. So you
Yeah.
mentioned you have 3 kids. I have 2 daughters. This question is very much on my mind lately, which is how are we raising our kids to be leaders? And do you think the next generations are as driven and prepared to meet, oh my God, the many challenges that we are leaving them? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question because I, like you, I wake up every day and I want my children to be driven, but I want them to be safe. I want to help them, but I want them to hustle. We're all going through, again, when we have the privilege of feeling secure, our conundrum is how much do we give our children of that security and how much do we sort of just try and give them drive? I think for me, one of the mantras I've sort of tried to stick to is I don't know that I have to train my daughter to be a leader, but I do believe I want my children to be makers. And by that I mean people who
Mm,
understand that makership is that for them possibility should be I can manifest the thing I want. It's a matter of tiny acts. I've never wanted my children to feel like being an entrepreneur is something mighty. When my daughter was young, we
right.
published a book on Blurb. I just wanted her to see that, okay, if you want to be an author, it's really just about taking those stories you wrote and we're going to retype them in a book and we're going to send it away and you're going to have a product. She was a Girl Scout. And the thing I loved about the Girl Scouts is yes, you're a little entrepreneur. So I
That's right.
mostly have wanted my children to feel like they can be creative problem solvers and and just makers, because I think when you have a maker mindset, and sort of just some of that design thinking, it helps you be a
Right.
creative problem solver. So I want my children just to understand that acts of makership, small, can result in something. And I don't know if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so makership is what I really have wanted my children to learn. And sometimes I feel like it's by exposing them to entrepreneurship in their own life. Sometimes it's been about taking them to work and being yeah, this is how the sausage is made. I
Yeah.
have the fun privilege now that my oldest son is 21 and he's in his third year and going to his final year with a business degree, and he's really curious about entrepreneurship. So I sat down with him last summer.
Sure.
He had a job at a startup and I showed him some of the companies that I'm an angel investor in, and just to give him these little exposures. So I think those little exposures, these glimpses, might be what we can give our children. um, that's my best guess, but I
Yeah.
will tell you this, they are the my most hopeful moments is our children are so much more facile and agile and things than we were. Our parents would say that about us. I look at my children and
Oh my
how
gosh.
facile
Right.
they are with devices and figuring things out. And, they're on Google
Yeah.
Calendar and they figured this out and that out. And they're telling me, stuff that I never do. I mean, I learn a lot of my new stuff from my kids.
Yeah.
Um,
Completely.
so I think they have a facility and an agileness. And I think the biggest things, they're growing up in a world where kind of nobody in my family or the families I know thinks it's strange to have a president who is African American, or a vice president who's a woman,
That's
or
right.
a mother who's a CEO, or a turbaned man
So
who's an
beautiful.
entrepreneur.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I don't want to say that they don't see color because color exists, but I think that they see a world that is full of color, and that's not unusual to them.
I love that. Absolutely. When we moved over to San Jose, my daughter said, I told my daughter, we have a new doctor for you. We found a new
Mhm.
pediatrician. She goes, what's
Mhm.
her name? Like she assumed as a
Nice.
5-year-old, right, that it was a woman. So I
I
completely
love that.
appreciate that, right?
I love that.
And I'd love to get to one more question. I think we have time, or maybe two more here. This is it's a scary time during COVID to be jumping and
Mhm.
taking risks and leaving careers, right? Someone has a question here that I can certainly relate to, that shaking the boat or taking the leap is terrifying when such huge shifts are happening in our
Mhm.
world, right? So, do you agree with that? And should we think about risk taking differently in the middle of a pandemic and everything else
Mhm.
that's happening?
Yeah, I first of all, I think that the one thing everybody should take away from the pandemic is that our own resiliency and agility is a lot more than we thought it was. So I would posit even to the
Sure.
person who wrote in, I bet you made decisions in a heartbeat and on a dime much quicker for your family, for school, for work, because you had to, right? So the first and most important thing is don't lose the lesson that even in a crisis, often we actually take more risks and are more agile than we are when times are stable. And we have too much time, to your point, to like worry and cycle and think about everything that could go wrong. Weirdly, as I said to people, like we took more risks to avoid harm than we often
Right.
take in our daily lives when things are good. So I'd say the
Yeah.
first thing that COVID should give you is a grounding, in your own
Yeah.
agility and resilience. Now, that doesn't mean that for you, like the right time is to walk out and take a gigantic risk today. I think that it may well be that, having kind of gone through a lot of work upheaval, you're trying to get your bearings and, get your feet under you. There's nothing wrong with that. Mostly, I
That's right.
think that it's about, you know, reaching for possibilities, big or small, and taking the lesson from COVID that you are far more agile and resilient than you think you are, and far more capable. And just to remember to exercise that capacity in good times, right? So, yeah, if you're
That's
like, hey, I want to take a minute, it has been a crazy year. I'm not suggesting that everybody quit their jobs, but I'm suggesting
right.
we just learned a really powerful lesson about ourselves and actually our ability to respond to risk. And also understand risk comes and finds you whether you like it or not. So the idea of taking that, what is now a superpower you didn't realize you had, and just knowing when to tap into it. And you can tap it into only little ways. Believe me, little ways are as good as big ways. It's just about kind of having some confidence in your ability to choose possibility. It's not just when times
Absolutely.
are bad, it's when times are good. You can do that
Right.
too.
Oh, I love it. Wonderful way to wrap up our audience Q&A here. I want to thank you to our audience for all these great questions. But before we officially wrap, it is a tradition here to ask all our speakers that magic question, Sukhinder. Hopefully you've got
Mhm.
an answer. What is your 60-second idea to change the world? I'm interested in hearing yours.
My 60-second idea to change the world is not only that each of us should choose possibility, but that each of us can take an opportunity when we're choosing possibility for ourselves to expand possibility for others. It's not that hard. So, once you realize that you can choose possibility for yourself, like what does it take to incrementally expand opportunity for others as you're expanding it for yourself? Not that much, but it has a powerful effect in multiplying
Right.
possibilities.
Proximity to opportunity. That's right.
That's right. You
Wonderful.
don't have to give up your own ambitions, just expand them to include others.
Thank you so much, Sukhinder Singh Cassidy, for joining me today at Inforum. So wonderful to get to know you a little better, hear your story. And a reminder that Sukhinder's book, Choose Possibility, Take Risks and Thrive, Even When You Fail, can be purchased through your preferred bookseller. If you'd like to watch more virtual programs or support the Commonwealth Club's efforts in making virtual programming, please visit commonwealthclub.org/online. And I'm Suzanne St. John Crane from American Leadership Forum. Thank you so much. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you.